The wind cut through the early morning as I watched my daughter hold a small package in her hands. The Christmas tree lights reflected in her eyes, as if they held a precious secret. She approached slowly, almost silently, and placed the gift in my lap. Then, leaning close to my ear, she whispered, "Don't open it here." My breath caught instantly. I didn't understand the reason for that sentence, but the serious tone made me uneasy. The package was small and light, but it seemed to carry an invisible weight. Her gaze darted away from mine, as if she feared I'd discover something before it was time. Share this story to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from. I'll be thrilled to read every comment. My heart raced for no apparent reason. The clock on the wall seemed louder, ticking away every second. I hesitated to ask what it meant. Around me, the family continued to laugh, exchanging gifts, but my attention was riveted on the red and gold wrapping paper. Something about the situation told me this wasn't just any ordinary gift. Her hands were trembling slightly, and I could tell. I tried to smile to hide my concern, but curiosity was building inside me like a storm about to break. I looked at her again, trying to catch some clue in her expression. All I saw was a mix of anxiety and fear. I didn't know whether to open it or wait. The instruction, "Don't open here," echoed in my mind, over and over, like an almost desperate order. There was no more room for relaxation that night. Something inside me told me that when I discovered what was inside that package, my life could change. And it was there, in the middle of that seemingly perfect meal, that I realized that Christmas was about to become the most unforgettable, for better or worse. I just didn't know that, by following that order, I was opening a door I could never close. I rose from the table, the gift clutched tightly in my hands. I felt the weight of my daughter's gaze following me, as if to ensure I would truly comply with her request. The house was full of voices and laughter, but my footsteps toward the hallway sounded deafening to me. I walked through my bedroom door and closed it carefully. The soft lamp cast shadows on the walls, creating an almost movie-like atmosphere. I placed the gift on the bed and stared at it as if it were a living, breathing thing. Her voice still echoed in my mind. "Don't open it here." Why such secrecy? I sat up slowly, taking deep breaths, trying to calm the tension building inside me. My hand slid over the wrapping paper, feeling its rough texture. For a moment, I considered going back into the living room and asking directly, but there was something inside me that needed to know for myself. I looked at the closed door and felt a chill. It was as if I were about to commit a transgression, to violate a silent pact between us. Still, curiosity burned brighter than fear, and it was at that moment that I began to tear the paper apart, millimeter by millimeter, like someone discovering a forbidden secret. The sound of the paper being opened seemed to echo in the room, mingling with the distant sound of laughter in the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. My palms were sweating, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. And then, as the last fold of paper fell away, I saw what was inside. My entire body froze. The air was knocked from my lungs, and for a moment I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Inside the box was a small, ancient brown leather case with signs of wear around the edges. It looked like it had passed through many hands before reaching me. It wasn't heavy, but somehow it seemed to carry a density beyond measure. My heart pounded as if it wanted to escape my chest. I ran my fingers over the metal latch, which was as cold as ice. It was one of those old-fashioned mechanisms that made a barely audible click when opened. For a moment, I hesitated. Should I continue? Part of me wanted to close everything and forget, but another part, I needed to see it through. When I lifted the lid, I smelled a faint scent of old wood and dust. Inside was something wrapped in a piece of hand-embroidered fabric. The embroidery was delicate, but the colors were faded with age. I pulled the fabric away carefully, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Unfolding it, I found a small black and white photograph with jagged edges. I recognized my daughter's face, but she was much younger, maybe 3, and beside her was someone I didn't recognize. The strange thing was that, in the bottom corner, there was a date, which didn't make sense. The date showed a day that hadn't yet happened. This wasn't just a gift. It was a riddle, a silently coded message. And the moment I touched the photo, a strange sensation ran through me, as if something had shifted in the air around me. It was then that I noticed an even more disturbing detail. In the photo, behind them, there was something, or someone, watching. The figure in the background was blurry, but not blurry enough not to send chills down my spine. It was tall, with features that looked human, but the shadow surrounding it gave the impression of something else. Its gaze, even in the photo, seemed fixed on me, as if it recognized me. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just a coincidence, a play of light and shadow. But the more I looked, the more I felt as if that presence were real and close. It was as if the photograph carried a fragment of something alive, trapped in the paper. I tucked the photo back into its fabric and quickly closed the case, as if that would dispel the growing discomfort. But it was too late. The feeling of being watched had already set in. My previously silent room now seemed filled with subtle noises, like muffled footsteps in the hallway. I stood and walked to the door, opening it cautiously. The hallway was empty, lit only by the dim light of the Christmas tree coming from the living room. However, a sudden chill ran through my skin, as if someone had passed me by unseen. I went back inside and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to rationalize everything. Maybe it was just the mood of the night, the tension, my imagination. But deep down, I knew something about that photo wasn't normal. Something was about to happen, and the next moment, I heard 3 slow, heavy knocks on my bedroom door. The sound echoed through the room as if recorded in slow motion. 3 spaced, firm knocks that seemed to vibrate in the air. My entire body stiffened, and I felt my blood run cold. I hadn't expected visitors, especially at that hour, with the whole family busy in the living room. I stood slowly, each step to the door feeling longer than the last. I pressed my ear to the wood, but all I heard was the silence itself crushing me. My hand hesitated on the doorknob, as if my body wanted to stop me. Something told me that if I opened it, nothing would be the same. I took a deep breath and turned the doorknob. The door opened slowly, revealing nothing. The hallway was empty, so quiet that even the distant sound of laughter in the living room seemed to have faded. I took a step outside, but there was no one there. The air was colder in there, almost biting. I closed the door, feeling a strange weight on my chest. When I turned, I noticed the gift was no longer on the bed. The box was gone. There was no sign of the torn paper, no embroidered fabric, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. Fear began to turn into silent panic. I knew the object couldn't just disappear, and if it wasn't with me anymore, who had it now? It was at that moment that I heard a soft, childlike voice coming from behind me. "You opened it, didn't you?" I turned immediately and saw my daughter standing in the bedroom doorway. Her eyes were teary, but there was something strange in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. She didn't just look sad, she looked scared. "I told you not to open it here," she repeated, her voice breaking at the end of her sentence. I took a step toward her, trying to explain, but she backed away as if my approach were dangerous. My heart sank. I'd never seen her act like this toward me. She took a deep breath and stared into my eyes. "Now, he knows where you are." The sentence fell like a weight in the air, and I felt the world around me contract. Before I could ask who he was, my daughter ran out of the room. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Every detail of that night seemed to take on a hidden meaning, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. But one thing was clear. There was a he in this story, and he was coming. I decided I needed to find my daughter immediately and figure this all out. But when I stepped out into the hallway, she was nowhere to be seen. The noise of the voices in the living room had completely stopped. It was as if the whole house could hear me breathing. It was then that, at the end of the corridor, I saw the silhouette of a figure standing still, watching me in the dark. The dim light from the Christmas tree came from behind, but I could still make out the clear outline of her silhouette. She was tall, too thin to be human, with shoulders that seemed to lean forward. Her head was tilted slightly to the side, as if studying me. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in fear. I knew if I turned or blinked, I might lose sight of it, and for some reason that felt even more dangerous. The figure didn't move, but the feeling of it getting closer grew stronger by the second. I called out for my daughter, my voice nearly breaking, but there was no response. The figure, however, reacted. Its head slowly straightened, and even in the dim light, I felt its eyes, if they were eyes, fixed on me. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. My breathing grew heavy, and a low sound, like a scratchy whisper, began to fill the hallway. It came from nowhere, or maybe it came from everywhere at once. I blinked, and the next moment, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, but the air remained thick, heavy. It was then that I noticed. Something cold was touching the back of my neck, like an invisible finger. I turned sharply, but there was nothing behind me. Still, the sensation of touch lingered, penetrating to the bone. It was as if something had imprinted itself on my skin without making it visible. Fear mingled with confusion. Was I losing my grip on reality? Or was there indeed something here that didn't belong here? I looked around, trying to find any sign of my daughter's presence. But everything was strange, as if the house had subtly shifted shape. The doors seemed narrower, the shadows longer, and the silence deeper. I took a few steps and realized the paintings on the wall weren't the same. Now they showed distorted images, people I didn't know looking directly at me. A chill ran through me. I tried to return to my room, but I realized the hallway seemed longer than before, as if the distance grew longer every time I tried to move forward. And then, in the background, I heard my daughter's voice again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Another voice, deep and slow, repeated her every word, like a delayed echo that didn't belong in this world. The voice repeated word for word, but with a deep, scratchy tone, as if passing through an ancient, rusty filter. The mere sound made my chest feel heavy, as if the air had become thicker. Each repetition seemed to come from somewhere very far away, and yet, at the same time, extremely close. I followed the sound with slow steps, like someone walking into a bad dream. With every meter, the voices became clearer, and I realized my daughter was saying something I didn't fully understand. It was almost a chant, words that seemed too ancient to fit in a child's mouth. I turned a corner of the hallway and saw her back to me. She stood motionless, staring at a fixed point on the wall. Beside her, the tall figure stood, now almost completely visible. Her arms were too long, and her face was covered in a shadow so dense it seemed to absorb the light. I called her name, but she didn't respond. The figure, however, slowly inclined her head, reproducing exactly the same movement as when I first saw her. The chant continued, and the delayed echo followed, as if responding in a forgotten language. I took another step, but the ground creaked beneath my feet. At that moment, the voices ceased. The silence was so abrupt it hurt my ears. The figure turned toward me, and I finally saw the face. It was like looking at a portrait painted with charcoal and fire. The features were human, but something was deeply wrong. The proportions were unnatural, and the skin looked cracked, like glass about to shatter. The eyes were black, bottomless pits, and yet I felt them piercing everything inside me. My entire body screamed to run, but the figure took a step toward me. It wasn't a quick movement, but there was a terrible certainty in it. No matter how hard I tried, it would catch me. My legs finally responded, and I instinctively backed away. My daughter turned at that moment. Her eyes, once full of life, were empty, as if she were in a trance. "He's here because of you," she said, in a tone that didn't seem like her own. The delayed echo repeated, deeper, closer. Without thinking, I grabbed her hand and pulled, trying to pull her away from the figure. But when I looked back down the hallway we'd come from, I realized it wasn't the same anymore. There was no exit. The path behind us now disappeared into solid darkness. The air turned frigid, and an invisible pressure pressed down on my shoulders. The figure was closer now, so close that I could hear the dry sound of its breathing, like wind rustling through dead leaves. The feeling of imprisonment gripped me brutally. The hallway behind me was engulfed in dense darkness, which felt not just like the absence of light, but like a physical barrier, alive and pulsating. The air grew heavier and heavier, and each breath hurt as if I were inhaling smoke. I gripped my daughter's hand tightly, feeling her cold, almost lifeless fingers. She stared at the figure, as if hypnotized, unable to resist. The being advanced in slow but calculated steps, each one making the floor vibrate beneath my feet, as if the entire house were complicit in its movement. The silence was broken only by the dry sound of that breathing, a deep breath that seemed to penetrate my skin and lodge itself in my chest. I tried to speak to her, calling her name, begging her to run with me, but my voice seemed distorted in the air, as if the sound had broken before reaching her ears. She didn't blink, and the emptiness in her eyes told me that part of her might already be lost forever. A primal desperation gripped me, and I realized there was no time to hesitate. I pushed her back, trying to create distance between her and the figure, but as soon as I took a step toward it, the corridor seemed to stretch, impossibly widening the distance. Every movement I made was met by a shift in the space, as if I were inside a living labyrinth, shaped by the will of that entity. The figure inclined its head again, but this time, a sound escaped its mouth. It wasn't a scream, not a word. It was a low, low roar that made my entire body tremble. The walls vibrated, and small cracks began to form in the ceiling, as if the house itself were yielding to its presence. It was at that moment that I realized something. The case that had disappeared was now in the figure's hands. He held it carefully, as if it were the key to something, or someone, and the fear I felt wasn't just for my life, but for the certainty that if he opened it, something much worse would happen. The case seemed even older now, as if the mere touch of that entity had drained some of its essence, leaving it aged, almost decaying. Even from a distance, I could sense a strange heat coming from it, mixed with a metallic smell, like rust and blood. The figure caressed its surface with its unnaturally long fingers, an almost affectionate gesture. My daughter began to murmur again, that same chant I'd heard before. The words sounded like syllables ripped from a dead language, echoing through the hallway and merging with the creature's breathing. The delayed echo accompanied each syllable, and this time it seemed closer to me than to her. I took a step forward, ignoring the terror clenching my throat. "Let her go," I tried to say, but my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. The figure stopped moving its fingers over the case and lifted its head, as if hearing me for the first time. The air around us seemed to compress, sucking the heat from the room. It was then that he unlocked the case with a soft, almost delicate click. A beam of dim light escaped from within, but it didn't illuminate. It only deepened the shadows. My daughter took a step toward him, as if being pulled by invisible strings, and I rushed to stop her. The moment I grabbed his arm, I felt something cold run through my entire body, as if I'd been plunged into icy water. A sharp pain shot through my head, and images that weren't mine began to form in my mind. Places I'd never seen, faces I'd never known, and always, in all of them, the presence of that figure. When I regained focus, I realized we were alone. The hallway had disappeared. The floor, the walls, everything was gone. We were now in an infinite space, surrounded only by absolute darkness, and ahead of us, his face glowed faintly, waiting. The darkness around us wasn't just an absence of light. It was something alive, moving almost imperceptibly, as if breathing. Each time I blinked, the darkness shifted shape, revealing brief glimpses of strange landscapes, twisted forests, horizonless seas, endless corridors that folded in on themselves. It was as if we were between worlds, in a space that didn't obey the rules of reality. My daughter remained motionless beside me, but her hand was no longer cold. It was completely icy, almost stiff. Her eyes were unblinking, and reflected a faint light that came from nowhere. I tried to call her, to shake her shoulders, but she didn't respond. It was as if she were trapped in another plane, half a step away from disappearing forever. The figure, motionless before us, seemed unhurried. His movements were sparse, but each tilt of his head, each shift in posture, carried a terrible symbolic weight, as if it were all part of a ritual. The case remained open in his hands, and the light within pulsed slowly, matching the rhythm of my breathing. That's when I realized that light was connected to me. With each beat of my heart, it intensified, and I realized that the figure hadn't come just for my daughter. It had come for both of us, for me. I was part of something that had begun long before that Christmas Eve. The next instant, a deep sound echoed through the void, like muffled thunder coming from beneath the earth. The darkness around us began to move faster, forming gigantic spirals, as if we were being sucked into the center of something colossal. The figure took its first real step toward me, and the distance between us disappeared in the blink of an eye. We were so close now that I could feel the icy breath of that presence. His eyes, or what seemed like eyes, opened wider, revealing a deep glow, like a burning coal about to go out. There was no hatred or anger in that look. There was something worse, an absolute certainty, as if he'd known the end of this story long before I'd lived. He raised the case to my face and tilted it slightly, letting the light spread across my skin. Instantly, I felt my entire body weaken, as if every ounce of energy was being sucked into the beam. At the same time, even more intense images flooded my mind, visions of a future I didn't want to believe was real. I saw my daughter alone, in strange places, repeating that chant to others, as if she were the bearer of a dark secret. I saw my own face, older, scarred, walking the empty streets of a city I didn't recognize, and in every vision, in the distance, the figure was there, always watching, always waiting. My breath caught in my throat, and I realized I had only one chance. Either I gave in to that call, surrendering myself completely, or I found a way to break the bond before it was too late. But how could I face something that seemed to exist outside the laws of the world? How could I fight a gaze that seemed to pierce my very soul? Then, without warning, my daughter finally moved. Her eyes flickered again, and she stared at me for a brief moment, as if she'd come to her senses. "Now," she whispered, and this time her voice was her own. In that moment, I understood that the choice wouldn't be mine alone. The "now" my daughter whispered wasn't just a sound. It was like a shot that shattered the frozen tension in the air. My muscles reacted before my mind could comprehend the plan. I gripped her hand tightly, and without thinking, I dove into the void beside the figure, trying to break the invisible circle that trapped us there. The darkness reacted like a wounded animal. Shadows closed in around us, trying to envelop our bodies. I felt invisible threads tugging at my feet, scratching my legs like sharp claws. The figure turned to follow us, but this time, it seemed slow, as if the mere fact that we were moving had broken some of its control. With each step, the space changed. First, ancient corridors filled with doors that slammed shut. Then, misty fields where shadows raced past. Each scene lasted only seconds before dissolving, as if we were falling through dimensions. My daughter squeezed my hand, and I felt her strength slowly returning, but also the fear growing within her. The case still held the figure, and even from a distance, I could see the light within it pulsing, stronger and faster. The feeling that it still trapped us wouldn't go away. I knew running wasn't enough. We had to sever the connection. Something told me that as long as that light remained, it could reach us anywhere. The sound of the delayed echo returned, now deeper and more violent, like endless thunder. The words were incomprehensible, but it didn't matter. I felt their meaning directly in my body. They were orders, summons, calls for us to stop. The faster we ran, the more the ground beneath our feet seemed to crumble. I knew we were running out of time. That's when we saw, up ahead, a door. There was no wall, no structure, just the door, suspended in the void, with an intense light escaping through the cracks. I felt, instinctively, that if we passed through it, we could leave this place, but something inside me also knew. Passing through meant leaving something behind, perhaps a part of ourselves. I knelt before it, gripping the cold doorknob. I looked at my daughter, and she looked back at me, tears streaming down her face. "If we open it, we'll never go back to the way we were," she said, her voice trembling. The sound of the delayed echo was closer than ever, and I felt the figure approaching. The weight of that moment was unbearable. The ground shook, and I saw his shadow loom over us. There was no more time. I pushed the door open with all my strength. The light engulfed us. For a moment, there was absolute silence, and then I felt the ground beneath my feet again. We were back. The living room, the Christmas tree, the smell of food. It was as if nothing had happened, but my daughter's hand still trembled in mine, and when I glanced at the couch, I saw the red and gold package, exactly as it had been before I'd opened it. Only this time, the clasp on the box was broken, and in place of the light, there was only a black void, pulsing faintly. I knew we hadn't won. We had just bought time. If this story gave you chills, share it so more people know what can happen when a gift isn't meant to be opened. Subscribe to the channel, send this video on WhatsApp, and comment here where you're watching from. I read every comment, and I'd love to hear how this story unfolds.